So, good afternoon. My name is Maria Jacob, and I've decided to focus my research proposal on the management of the cancer crab fishery along the Atlantic coast that refers to the Jonah crab and rock crab. So, the purpose of this research proposal is to address management needs required to protect the cancer crab resource. Press releases from the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission raises concern that the fishing effort is increasing sixfold. Therefore, this research proposal would identify alternatives to overcome some of the challenges that managers must overcome in order to protect the resource. Specifically, the lack of data on the cancer crab resource and the lack of management. We know that some states have implemented coastal management measures, but that it's inconsistent and does not exist for all states for which the fishery does occur. The importance of this research proposal at a national level is that this domestic seafood product does provide direct human consumption value as well as economic value. So that means that because it's domestic, we have fresher seafood available to all Americans. And we know that if it's harvested within the United States, we don't have to import these resources. There is also a benefit to the jobs created to fishermen, seafood dealers, and processors, and that these products support a working waterfront. We know that existing demands for the seafood product, both in the United States and internationally, creates a revenue that adds to the gross domestic product. And we can see some information on exports in 2013 valued at $5.19 billion for all of seafood. So that is a huge percentage of, or not a huge percentage, but that's a great revenue that we see. So it does provide some value there. We know that without these domestic supplies, that Americans would really have to rely on an increase in imported seafood, so that we would therefore lose that fresh seafood and then have to rely on frozen or canned seafood that would come from overseas. We know that there are CSAs for farm vegetables and fruits, but there also has been a rise in community-supported fisheries as well. So we're willing to pay the additional cost for fresher local seafood. At the regional level, we know that Massachusetts, specifically New Bedford Port, does host the most valuable or most profitable resource, which is the scallop resource. And we know that coming close second is the lobster resource in Maine. So we also know that we do pay attention, especially in the most recent months, that we focus on the Gulf of Maine cod quota and criticized managers for their draconian measures to reduce the amount of catch for the cod resource. So we do pay attention to those local seafood products, and it does matter to us. So this resource, which is also very much local, should be taken seriously. We've already mentioned that the sea salt resource is the most profitable resource, and that management measures are required in order to protect those resources. So in 1994, 3 vital fishing areas were closed off for both groundfish and scallop fishermen in order to protect both of those resources. And because of that, by early 2000s, the scallop resource was fully rebuilt and obviously is the nation's most profitable. So management measures do play a major role in maintaining sustainable fishing practices. The timing of management response plays a major role in just how successful those management measures are. Reactive measures are those that can really disrupt fishing operations in order to protect a resource that's in danger of further decline. We know that proactive measures would allow for more reasonable limits to be set so that there's a continued fishing effort while the stock is either being rebuilt or that it's being maintained at the current level of abundance. So we have two major mandates in Congress right now that support fishery fishery resources conservation. That is the Magnuson-Stevens Act, in which we have 8 regional management councils that work with National Marine Fisheries Service. We have the Atlantic Coastal Act that provides cooperative management measures for all 15 states along the Atlantic coast, and they work in consort with National Marine Fisheries Service. In terms of the cancer crab resource, because it does if it does mostly exist in state waters, although that information is not verified, it's more likely the case based on the distribution of the resource that therefore Atlantic Coastal Act would be more appropriate, and so that the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission would work with National Marine Fisheries Service and the states to implement appropriate management measures. So management response to a fishing stock is that it must first determine the status of the stock, whether it's healthy or poor, and the current levels of fishing. Based on that information, management measures are set in place to either maintain the stock or rebuild the stock. So in order to determine the status of the stock, we collect information on the life history of the species. So that's the biology of the species. And that information is used to sort of determine a national mortality, or really to determine how well that species can rebound from both environmental stressors as well as fishing effort stressors. We know that the abundance of the resource plays a major role in just how successful that resource is able to rebound from fishing pressures as well. So, because of the data gaps that currently exist for this particular 2 species, we have determined that relative abundance is appropriate. Relative abundance is collected by fishery independent inshore state trawl survey data, such as URI's data collected, and the Maine Department of Marine Resources landings data. So that information is used to come up with a catch per unit effort information. And so this method measures relative abundance. So over a time series, you can see how the stock is responding to increases or decreases in fishing effort. There are assumptions made that increases in catch per unit effort is indicative of an increase in overall species abundance, whereas a decrease in catch per unit effort is indicative of a decrease in the overall species abundance. So right now we're looking at URI's inshore trawl survey. So this is the fishery independent data. So it does not collect information from fishing vessels, but it's rather a completely separate study. And we can see that although there's been a sharp decline in the early 1990s, we're currently at levels that we were at in 1959. So there's been, since the early 90s, there's been a sharp decline in the catch per unit effort. So right now we're looking at information from the state of Maine that shows really we can see that catch is decreasing as supported with Narragansett's survey. So that doesn't necessarily mean that fishing effort is decreasing, but catch is decreasing. So we see that decrease in catch per unit effort. So what we can conclude based on that information is that catch per unit effort is decreasing, and that since fishing effort is increasing, that the stock is really declining because the catch is still decreasing even though fishing effort is increasing. So the overall abundance of the species is decreasing over time. So that information on catch per unit effort and the overall fishing effort information, we can really see that there's some value to that resource. So from 1994 to 2004, there's the landings have increased, and then since then it continues to increase. So there is an ex-vessel value of close to $6.5 million, and with with, you know, Jonah crab, um, 60 cents for the pound, and then raw crab 44 cents for the pound, that this fishing effort will continue to increase because the market demands do show that the resource is valuable. So without management measures taken, that fishing effort will continue to increase and the stock will continue to decrease over time. So this information on the landings that we can see here is that um, from this information we can really see that Rhode Island, Massachusetts and Maine play a major role in the overall cancer crab landings in the Northeast. You can see that here. This is the average annual landings by state from 2000 to 2014, with these 3 states as the major players. So in order to manage the resource, the next step would be to collect the information to fill in those data gaps. So we collect information on the status of the stock and fishing effort. Fishery-dependent data exists and can be set in place by state lobster harvester reports, by federal harvester permit requirements to really keep track of the number of permits that are utilizing the resource, and then really limit fishing effort by managing those permit holders. So those are some options available. There can also be a mandate placed for federal dealers who already collect information on other species to start collecting information on the cancer crab resource as well. Fishery independent data does provide some unbiased information on the status of the stock as well and the biology of that resource. But it does come at a cost to fishery managers. So these management alternatives that I've suggested, along with, so we have the harvester permit requirements, we have the dealer reporting requirements, and if we use this observer program, which is really just a scientist on board fishing vessels collecting information on what's being caught and what's being discarded, so what's being caught but not kept and what's being kept. We really need to collect that information from lobster vessels because that information does not exist and there's no way for us to know really what percentage of the total catch that the lobster fishery does utilize. Port sampling is really just a scientist waiting at the docks to collect information on landings. So that can really add more accurate information that could really support dealer reports as well. The trawl survey data would collect information on life history parameters that can really determine how well a stock can rebound from environmental stressors and fishing pressures. So based on the management alternatives that I've identified in my research proposal, I also plan to focus on doing a cost-benefit analysis. That can be used to really determine what measures would be more appropriate based on the cost to fishery management. So how do we overcome these challenges without really creating additional burden or over-cumbersome burden to our current fiscal situation. So the information on cost analysis can really be done through literary review. So specifically National Marine Fisheries Service does have an operations and budget department that does publish information on really itemized information on how fishery managers use those fundings to support their efforts. So that information can be used. And we know that all the program alternatives that I have suggested have been utilized in other fisheries, so that information has to be out there already. A benefit analysis would be to identify and quantify indirect and direct benefit to each alternative, and that's benefit to the resource itself, short-term and long-term benefits to protecting that resource, and really to the fisheries itself as well.